From now until the end of this video, every time that you hear me say snake, I'm referring to the concept of snake, specifically the ones we control. That means naked snake, Raiden, and solid snake.
Nope.
In the actual timeline of Metal Gear, the things that Naked Snake does in this game lead to the things that happen to Solid Snake and Raiden and MGS2. But in the thematic arc of the series, this game comes last. I am really glad to be doing more objective, literal analyses between all of this crazy meta insanity that's been punctuating the rest of this series so far. I don't expect everyone to buy what I'm saying in those sections, since they're essentially just a way more fleshed out version of what's become known as the phantom pain argument, which is basically a joke in the community. People go around saying the phantom pain is supposed to be bad because Kojima didn't like Metal Gear anymore, he's trying to sabotage the series. Similarly, oh, Raiden's supposed to be annoying, or oh, the plant section is designed to be really boring, or oh, MGS3 was designed to feel like it doesn't have any new ideas. I think that argument really sells Kojima short, and sells short how varied and dynamic this series is. While it's no secret that working for Konami is awful, and Kojima has basically envisioned every single Metal Gear game since Metal Gear 1 as being the last in the series, Kojima clearly had gigantic ambitions for these games since the very beginning. I mean, if you ask me, MGS 1, 2, and 3 all have a meta-narrative about moving on from the past and starting a new series, but each one of those games has so much more going on inside of them than just that idea of a creator wanting to be done with the series. While that concept is something that gets more and more pronounced as we move through the series, MGS4 and V are a whole lot more than just Kojima trying to kill the series by any means necessary. I myself have puppeted the narrative that that's basically the main point of MGS4. Frankly, at the time of writing, I think that that's still the most interesting thing in the game, how self-destructive it feels. But there's a whole hell of a lot more that my original MGS4 video didn't touch on. And as I sit down to replay it, that's what I'm going to be focusing on. We're still going to be covering that self-destructive side, as that meta angle is a major part of why I originally wanted this to all be a single video, but there's a whole lot of really great things about MGS4 that I've never really seen anyone talking about. So, let's replay this monster of a game. Wish me luck. Oh my god. Look, Death Stranding is still my favorite game of all time, and Metal Gear Solid 2 is still my favorite game in the series, but, well, I didn't know that a game could be that good, and my entire job is talking about how amazing games can be. MGS4 went from being my least favorite game in the series to being my second favorite, behind only the game that, as I said a couple of videos back, literally changed my life and helped me define myself. Like I said, I've played this game before, and while I've always respected it, I never exactly liked it. We'll get into why later, but we need to start with what made this playthrough different for me. Having marathoned MGS 1, 2, and 3 in the days beforehand helped me digest the reference-heavy plot, and playing on the extreme difficulty for the first time forced me to really learn the game. But there was something else. Something that fundamentally changed this game to its very core from the other time that I played it. I was house-sitting this weekend, and I had access to the craziest home theater I've ever seen. Sure, the game looked really good on that TV, but what changed everything in this game was surround sound. In my case, Dolby Atmos surround sound. I'd previously only played this game with the speakers of some crappy eBay-bought Chinese TV, and I found the gameplay ridiculously hard to digest and enjoy, even on a lower difficulty. Whereas the other games in the series were so incredibly mechanically driven and readable, that's just not what MGS4 is. Playing this game with true surround sound provided me with the most immersive experience I've ever had with a game, maybe even beating out Half-Life Alyx. I know it sounds weird that I've talked more about the sound setup than the game itself so far, but surround sound, if you ask me, was so fundamental to my enjoyment of this game. This is a game about sense. That's the theme word for this game. Officially, it goes gene, meme, scene, sense, piece, race. Whereas the previous games would show you more or less exactly how far an enemy could see, and give you these handy overhead cameras that gave you all the information you needed to plan and manipulate the situation, this game doesn't give you any of that information. This is a game about using all of your senses to extrapolate data about your situation. You, the player, can't smell or taste enemies, but that's about it. you can hear exactly what's going on, down to the footsteps, making different sounds depending on the footwear and the surface being walked on. You can feel an enemy's presence based on the vibration of the controller. For instance, here, I was paying careful attention to the rumble of my controller, as it indicated how close the overhead helicopter was, which would inform my tactics, all without having to take my camera off the ground enemies to stare at the sky. You can get a read on a soldier's state of mind by looking at them. If they were distracted with combat, or running away from a dangerous situation, or if something had caught their attention, their body language will inform you of that, and you can make a decision based on that. These aren't just cool little details that don't matter too much in practice, like similar details were in MGS3. These are the details that make this game playable. Gene, meme, and scene were mainly referring to thematic details of the narrative and meta-narrative in the previous 3 games, but the theme word sense describes every single aspect of MGS4. Since a lot of people probably want something really meaty to kick off a video like this, let's go ahead and demonstrate how these soldiers' psyches actually work. While, yes, reading body language and using context clues to figure out if a guard is distracted or not is important, that's just the tip of the iceberg. If you equip the Solid Eye and look at these soldiers or any other character in the game, you see these colors to the right of their ID. These correspond to different responses to combat fatigue that each character is predisposed to. So a soldier with a red aura can be sent into an angry frenzy. When pushed to their limit by watching their friends die or having several near-death experiences, they snap into a psychotic rage and rush towards whoever they're fighting without a second thought for their own survival. They even start foaming at the mouth. This is super useful against soldiers that are making themselves difficult to hit, like a sniper. Soldiers with this blue aura will start crying their eyes out when they're pushed to their limit. Tactically, this essentially just takes them out of the fight until they're able to take a breather and calm themselves down. Soldiers with green auras will start violently screaming, distracting nearby soldiers and calling attention to themselves. Lastly, soldiers with yellow auras, when pushed to their limit, snap into a state of psychotic masochism, randomly attacking friend and enemy alike. While, yes, you absolutely can use all of this information to your advantage, it isn't always the most useful set of tricks, given that you can just as easily dispatch a soldier by simply shooting them. However, just knowing that all of these effects are being simulated in real time for every single soldier you see adds this absolutely insane sense of depth to the game. It makes each soldier feel like an individual and helps to contextualize all of the trauma that they've experienced that's being suppressed by those nanomachines of theirs. By the way, whenever Ocelot suppresses their nanomachines and all the soldiers start acting like zombies, this is what's actually going on there. All of them are experiencing their combat fatigue, exactly as they would in standard gameplay if you stress them out too much. However, that's just the other characters. Their emotions impact how they perceive the world and how they interact with it. What's equally interesting is how Snake perceives his world, how Snake and the player's senses work in this game. This is the kind of thing that's incredibly hard to do justice in video form, so how about I just give you an example of the moment that this concept of using your senses really clicked for me, and I felt like I was truly getting this game for the first time. It was this section right here. I'd been stuck on this checkpoint for so long. I probably retried 20 times, each attempt taking like 8 or more minutes. I'd tried everything from freeing the prisoners to make a distraction for myself, to sneaking along the outer perimeter of the base, to diving from rooftop to rooftop, to luring as many guards over here to me so that I could take them out without their friends being able to see them. But eventually I made it through, only to find that I wouldn't hit the next checkpoint until I was able to sneak through the absolute gauntlet over there. The opening act in Afghanistan was definitely easier, since almost every PMC mercenary was distracted with combat, and I could disguise myself as the militia soldiers they were fighting. But I had one major advantage here that I didn't have in Afghanistan. Everything was quiet. The surround sound and perfect playing conditions had immersed me in the previous act with gunshots and mortar fire filling the room from all directions, but it was too much information for me to reasonably process and turn into much useful data about the situation. Here, though, I could take all the time I needed to listen to every footstep, hear every bird disturbed by movement, every blade of grass trampled underfoot, and soon enough, I had not a good understanding of where every guard was, but a workable understanding. As soon as I slowed down and let myself really just breathe in that air around Snake, I found myself thinking not like I would in MGS3, but in a totally new way that no game, Metal Gear or otherwise, has ever asked me to do. As I went forward, the local militia showed up, and they were, by chance, also heading towards my target. Fighting broke out between them and the PMC soldiers I was trying to sneak past, but by then I had the foundation to this new understanding of MGS4. Suddenly I caught myself thinking about my enemy's state of mind. I realized that just because there are bombs and gunshots going off in all directions doesn't mean that I need to start running. I kept things slow, I breathed, and I waited for my opportunities, and next thing I knew, I was right there, in the backyard of the mansion that the PMC was defending, and nobody had any idea that I'd gotten there. Soldiers would walk right past me, their eyes strictly focused on the front line of the battlefield. I kept things slow, and I did my best to pay attention to every detail, even in this hectic situation, and I managed to get to my objective pretty easily. Every time I failed in this game, got stuck at a checkpoint for half an hour and went outside to get some air, I would tell myself, just focus, breathe, take things slow, pay attention to every little detail. And that proved to be the thing that made me start enjoying this game, and the surround sound is what made it so natural to do. When I got to Laughing Octopus a little bit later, I aced the fight. I knew roughly where she was all the time, and when she disguised as something in the building, I slowed down to a crawl, listening for her laughter, and caught her time and time again. The last time I played this game, I was stuck on this fight for like an hour, and I wasn't even on the hardest difficulty at the time. This time, though, I let my senses dictate my actions instead of my normal MGS instincts and reflexes, and the fight was a cinch. I'll stop with the play-by-play of Act 2 shortly, but what happened next is really important. Raiden called me up and taught me all about tracking so that I could follow the little clues left by Naomi and find where Liquid's PMC had taken her. This tracking section, much like Laughing Octopus, felt like a total slog the first time that I played it. But this time, with this new understanding of the game, it was one of the highlights of my entire playthrough. I watched extremely closely for Naomi's distinct slip shoe footprints as I slowly creeped along in the woods. I paid attention to every little detail, each sound I could hear, from my own footsteps to the birds in the distance. Every leaf that fell from a tree, every bit of running water which could give me some information on the layout of this place. I was wary of the slight hum of my thermal goggles alerting enemies to my position. I focused on every little clue that the environment gave me, and in doing so, I was able to subvert what felt like a dozen ambushes that had caught me off guard the first time I played. Like I said, this is an extremely hard thing to put into words. The only way that I can really describe it is, again, that I simply let myself breathe the air around Snake, and that's what finally helped me succeed and finally made the game click for me. From this point on, I was in. I don't mean to turn this into a straight-up review of MGS4. I'll get to the real thematic significance of this stuff soon, but there's something really, really cool that happens when a game forces you to get this immersed, and it was something that I'd never experienced before. See, whether it was a quiet forest full of enemies lying in ambush or a violent, loud, and hectic battlefield, I had all the time in the world to take in every little detail before making my move during the normal sneaking sections of this game. But when things get really intense, suddenly I was getting this incredible sense of sensory overload. The game had trained me to recognize that there isn't a single leaf falling from a tree that falls for no reason. Every detail was vitally important to my success. Then suddenly I found myself having to adapt that mindset to a situation like this one. It's like turning on your night vision goggles at the exact same time that the lights suddenly come on again, and you're just blinded. These climactic action sequences felt so damn real as a result of how the game had groomed me to be hyper-attentive beforehand. That, combined with the sheer difficulty of this game, the hardest in the series in a lot of ways, made for some of the most engaging moments that I've ever had with a game. To give a quick example, I was fighting the final member of the Beauty and the Beast Corps, Screaming Mantis. After a few attempts, I was starting to know most easily how to beat her. She has two dolls, Sorrow, which controls the dead, and Mantis, which controls the living. I made a point of killing as many soldiers as I could, as I focused on stealing our Sorrow doll. Once I had the Sorrow doll, she had no more soldiers to control, as I'd already killed everybody that was alive. She was more or less defenseless now, except for one really dangerous and difficult to dodge attack, where she throws 4 karambit knives at you. I managed to steal her Mantis doll too, so that she could no longer use Merill to bait me out, and she was all mine. I was one hit away from dying, and she was just about to use that incredibly dangerous knife-throwing attack. As soon as I saw this, I paused, pulled out the Mantis doll, and fired it at Screaming Mantis. To my surprise, the game prompted me to hold the left bumper and shake the controller. A little known fact about the PS3 controller is that every button is pressure sensitive, save for L3 and R3. The system can tell how hard you press square or the bumpers, and it was only by pressing R1 extra hard that you could actually choke a guard unconscious. So, knowing this, I pressed L1 about as hard as I've ever pressed a button in my life, and I shook the controller so hard that I almost hurt my arm while grunting something under my breath like, "Give me control, Mantis." Hell, in the later half of the button mashing sequence, I literally caught myself saying, "You can do it, Snake," between the pained moans of my exertion. This kinda sounds lame, like some little brother shit, but this is huge for me. I'm the type to die in Dark Souls one hit away from finishing a super hard boss fight and just give a little and move on. For me to be so engaged with what's going on in a game that I'd not only start talking to the boss, but also remember, even in the heat of the moment, what that doll was even supposed to do in the game's fiction, allow me to control her, is absolutely incredible. This is what all of that immersion is really good for. It's a really unique twist on stealth gameplay, but that newfound immersion straight up transformed the game for me into something that I didn't even know video games were capable of being. Me having to shake the controller like that and squeeze L1 for dear life touches on something that's really interesting about Kojima games for me. He really likes to use the hardware available to its absolute fullest. We all know about Psycho Mantis reading your memory card in MGS1, but knowing that in MGS3, for instance, how hard I press square determines if I choke a guard unconscious or just snap his neck connects you with the game in a way that I've never seen another game maker do. Zooming in on cutscenes with the up button and having the game display in full detail the microscopic shakiness of my finger, well, it makes me feel like my body itself is part of the game. Like Kojima might as well have me on a heart rate monitor and had Snake's stress gauge reflect my own finger shakiness. When you combine this incredible, and as far as I'm concerned, unmatched use of sound with this intricately detailed gameplay where every individual NPC has their own mental state, the incredible use of controller rumble, and the Metal Gear thing where paying attention to the story can help you in the gameplay, that's really what it feels like. It feels like everything that could possibly exist inside my body, inside my room, and inside my mind has some small impact on the tactics I'm going to use to progress the game and the game state itself. I kind of made a point of trying to focus my whole life on this game for the 2 days that I had to play it on that amazing setup while I was house sitting. I would take regular breaks, be it to take the dog for a walk or just get some air in between the cutscenes or after really difficult checkpoints, and whenever I stepped away from the game, I made a point of abandoning my usual media-addicted ways. I wouldn't look at my cell phone or anything, I'd just try to focus and pick up on as many little details of my environment as possible, just like in the game. I'd catch bugs flying near lights by seeing their shadows. I'd watch the cat's ears as she reacted to every little sound from the nature around her. I'd feel my purse hanging off of me and try to sightlessly identify what parts of it were touching the chair whenever I shifted positions. I'd idly scan the area with my ears, identifying which parts of the guard had the higher concentration of crickets. It's the sort of stuff you do all the time without thinking about it, and when I'd go back inside to play more, I'd realize that I was applying the same senses that I'm passively using in day-to-day life to the game in a way that I'd never had before. Sense. That's the name of the game with MGS4. It permeates through every aspect of how the player interacts with this game, from gameplay to just watching cutscenes. This is where we get to the story. How does MGS4 bring it on home and tie this incredible, and as far as I'm aware, never again attempted focus on the player's senses to its narrative and themes? Well, let's get into it. So, first off, this is the most complicated plot in any Metal Gear game, so if Snake Eater gets its own plot recap section, then MGS4 does too. A lot of this is revealed through plot twists, so I'll just tell it exactly how it is, exactly how it's delivered. Okay, so there's a lot to take in here. Just bear with me. Ocelot replaced his arm with liquids after Grey Fox cuts it off in MGS1, and he uses psychotherapy to fool himself into thinking that he's Liquid Snake, thus creating a semi-new character, Liquid Ocelot. He managed to reconstruct the GW AI that Emma's worm cluster destroyed in MGS2, and because of his mind programming, he was somehow able to trick the AI to work for him by using the biometric data of Solidus Snake, who's the only perfect clone of Big Boss, as a password. He tricks the AI cluster that essentially is the Patriots into accepting accepting GW as one of their own. Because of the way that the AI cluster is programmed, GW has second priority as the leader of the cluster, and so if Liquid is able to nuke the satellite that has the JD AI, the current leader of the AI cluster, then GW will move up the list and become the leader of the entire AI cluster, giving Liquid total control of the Patriots, and by proxy, all of mankind. The reason that control of the Patriots means control of the world is because they were currently developing a system to control people's senses through their nanomachines in order to bring perfect order and synchronicity to mankind. Look, I wrote like 3 pages trying to summarize all of the information that makes this plot make sense, but the more I think about it, the more it seems ridiculous and redundant to even attempt to do so. I promise that this story does make sense, but there's just too much to go over for this type of video, and most of it really wouldn't help me demonstrate my cases here. Let's just go over the facts that are actually relevant to what I have to say about this game's story and the game itself. More than the other videos in this series, this part is really going to benefit from you having played the game. Unfortunately, it's the most difficult game in the series to get working, since buying a PS3 for yourself is pretty much your only option unless you have an insanely powerful computer. For some reason, the AI just straight up broke during the Screaming Mantis fight, so I get to just have these 3 little goofy gals fucking dancing here for my background shot. This is awesome. What the fuck is this emulator? Anyways, let's get into it. Basically, the Patriots, which, for a refresher, are the AIs that this game's equivalent to the Illuminati left to rule over the world, have taken complete control over the very concept of a battlefield. Private military companies, PMCs, have all but antiquated the concept of nation-oriented armies. Every PMC is registered into the Patriot system, and every PMC soldier has their feelings manipulated by their nanomachines, by the Patriots. So a soldier can literally sense everything that their squad mates sense, and the nanomachines also mess with the user's neurotransmitters and hormones and whatnot to produce what is essentially a never-ending combat high. They suppress fear and anguish and guilt and hesitation, and controlling your senses, they can more or less control you. This is best demonstrated in this scene, where Rat Patrol 01 looks to be completely finished, but their nanomachines communicating with each other helps them to act as a single, autonomous unit. And in the scenes where Liquid temporarily shuts down people's nanomachines. Every time that this happens, years of PTSD, guilt, fear, loss, and anger stop being suppressed and hit the soldiers' psyches all at once, and their minds just can't take the stress. On top of that, save for antiquated weaponry that was never dismantled, like the Mississippi, you can't fire a gun or start the engine of a Humvee without the Patriots' consent. They can lock you out of your equipment whenever they want. All of the violence and grittiness of war has been washed clean. Nobody's fighting for a cause, nobody feels the effects of combat, nobody fears for their lives. It's all just like a video game to them. In a way, it's sort of a really nice extension of that idea at the end of MGS3, how every Metal Gear game is just a signifier of the times that necessitated a Metal Gear game to be made, that is to say, Konami's bank account. These soldiers aren't fighting for a cause either, they're just fighting because their masters told them to, just like Hideo Kojima, or Snake, or anybody else in this series by this point. So, the Patriots have done this to stimulate the war economy. It's this game's term for the military-industrial complex, which societies come to rely on, and as a test. They want to roll out this system to all of humanity, not just the soldiers, since almost everybody has nanomachines now. It's a lot like how the events of MGS2 were a way for the Patriots to test out their mimetic manipulation scheme, the S3 plan, on Raiden before rolling it out to the public. The Patriots are doing the same thing with Sons of the Patriots, the name of the system. They're testing it out on the absolute most extreme conditions, the world's battlefields, to make sure that the system is totally foolproof before unleashing it on all of mankind. I'll bring up some other plot points as they become relevant, but for now, let's move on. So basically, this whole game's story is about an AI cluster's scheme to control the population's senses, and the lesson of the gameplay is that our senses are incredibly valuable. Fear, exhaustion, natural, unexpected combat highs, and a cause worth fighting for are the things that make Snake such an effective soldier, both in gameplay and in the story. He's able to feel things in a way that the people around him just aren't anymore because of their nanomachines. He doesn't get hit with sudden PTSD when his nanomachines are shut off because he's been facing the reality of combat for his entire life, long before nanomachines were invented. He's stronger than anyone else in this game because he isn't relying on artificial enhancements to his senses. He's just using honest-to-God intuition combined with a sharp focus and a genuine sense of fear to make a joke out of the enemy's defenses. I'm not talking about the story here either. This is what we, the players, have to do to succeed on the harder skill levels. Use our senses. What's so cool about all of this is that they've completely upgraded the nature of MGS gameplay with this new sense-focused gameplay. And then they've made the core feeling of the gameplay something that the main antagonist, the Patriots, specifically wants to control and manipulate. Every time you hear a guard's footsteps and turn your octo camo on to fullest senses, you, as a player, are spitting in the face of everything that the Patriots are trying to do, and that's just awesome. However, this is a sequel to MGS3. Sure, it takes place 50 years after that game, but it's the next one in the series. MGS3 was about Naked Snake learning to believe in a cause and carry feelings and passion onto the battlefield so as to not just be a mindless soldier, but by the end of the game, he learns that the New World Order would be one that wants soldiers to be mindless. MGS4 is almost an inverted version of that, or at least a sequel to that character arc. There's a reason that I like to refer to all of the Snake player characters as being a single person. Naked Snake's character arc in MGS3 leads into Old Snake's character arc in MGS4, even though they're technically two different people. Well, from the very start of MGS4, Old Snake has a cause he believes in. He does carry his emotions onto the battlefield. Remember, this is the guy who harbored Sonny from the Patriots and started an anti-Metal Gear NGO philanthropy, and who cares genuinely deeply about Otacon and Campbell and Raiden. He's the guy who basically explained the meaning of life to Raiden at the end of MGS2. Old Snake, at the start of this game, is everything that Naked Snake could have turned into if the world after the Cold War allowed him to bloom in that way. Only this time, the world isn't heading to one where that kind of passion is frowned upon. No, in MGS4, the world has already become that. Snake is the odd one out for having these feelings and passions. Everyone around him essentially greets his philosophies on what makes a soldier with, "Okay, boomer." They don't understand Snake's passion because the vast majority of active armies don't have a nation or ideology or a sense of passion to begin with. MGS4 is about the world that Big Boss left behind, and that's a world that doesn't need snakes. This is, if you ask me, the main reason that Solid Snake is called Old Snake in this game. He's a relic of the past, and he doesn't fit in on these clean, emotionless battlefields. The world is rejecting Snake, and this leads us to our next big plot point. Snake is going through accelerated aging, basically clone decay. He's not going to be around for much longer than 6 months, and with him gone, the world will very quickly forget about how things were before the nanomachines started controlling everything. His accelerated aging is the last symbol of a dying perspective, and on top of that, Snake, pretty early in this game, learns that the Fox dye in his system, the virus that was engineered to target specific people like Liquid and Metal Gear Solid 1, has been slowly mutating over the years, and in about 3 months, it's going to have mutated to the point of targeting random individuals and giving them fatal heart attacks. Snake's about to become the most dangerous weapon of mass destruction ever conceived. And so, we spend the entire game with both Snake and the player thinking that this whole thing is going to end in his suicide. This is grim as hell, especially for a Metal Gear game. Snake's being forced to leave the world behind, just as it evolves to the point where it no longer even wants him. The world's going to descend into an utter absence of humanity and self, and people who care about anything real will soon be extinct.
You've been led back to war by something less than real.
That grimness carries itself throughout the entire game. This is easily the darkest Metal Gear game, even disregarding those plot points. And so when Metal Gear Solid 4 becomes the first game in the series to get an unambiguously happy ending, it hits so much harder. See, Snake's mission was never to destroy the Patriots or stop their plans or anything. His mission was just to stop Liquid from hijacking the AIs. He didn't know it, but he was put on this mission specifically by the Patriots in order to help them deal with Liquid. He was essentially fighting for all of that awful stuff that the Patriots were planning. However, the virus that Snake uploads into GW to stop Liquid was secretly programmed by Naomi to target the entire Patriots network. In the final moments of the game, we realize that we've just stopped all of the stuff that the Patriots were going to do. We destroyed the war economy, we destroyed the constant manipulation of soldiers, and the plans to implement that system into the rest of humanity. Essentially, we gave all of humanity a chance to wake up, just in time for Snake to kill himself, knowing that finally he can say that he's leaving a good, hopeful world behind. However, in one last plot twist, Snake learns that he doesn't have to commit suicide. It'd take a lot of explaining to get into it, but basically, the mutated fox dye in his system isn't actually a threat to humanity, as it's being replaced by a younger, less mutated version of fox dye that was injected with him earlier in the game. He's not going to become a biological weapon. He still only has about 5 months to live due to his accelerated aging, but Snake finally gets to return to his ride off into the sunset that ended MGS1. The whole point of that game's ending was that Snake didn't know how much time he had left, and so he decided to just live for himself for once and stop fighting. MGS2 got way too meta for that to stay true about Snake, but much like in MGS1, MGS4 ends with a very simple message being spoken to Snake.
For you to put aside the gun and live.
Live, Snake. You have to live.
It's way more nuanced, but just like in the original ending to Snake's story, he doesn't have to live as Snake anymore. He gets to live the rest of his life as David. Only this time, the series wouldn't last long enough for his happy ending to get retconned. That really feels like a segue into MGS-V, and yes, it is called V and not 5, but we aren't quite ready to go there yet. While I'm on the topic though, just to give you a quick breather after what felt like a conclusion, I've decided that I'm not going to be covering Peace Walker in this series. I know it's ironic because other than, I guess, Police Knots and Snatcher, that's the only Kojima-directed game that I haven't already made a video on beforehand, but re-examining it, it just doesn't really belong in this series of videos. I'm sure I'll do a video on it someday, but look, it's a side game. It isn't that important to, well, anything that I'm talking about in this series. Sure, it's fun and all around really good, but hopefully you get me. Truth be told, I wasn't all that sure if I wanted to include MGS-V in this video either. It's a little fuzzy. Obviously the V in the title refers to Venom Snake, which makes me want to categorize it as another side game, but that V also really looks like it represents a 5. The finality of MGS4's ending, combined with the plot passiveness of MGS-V, just makes it feel like it's not an ending to the series, any more than Peace Walker did. MGS4, as far as I'm concerned, is the ending to the series. However, V, unlike Peace Walker, is still pretty relevant to the overall point of this video series. We'll also be covering Ground Zeroes, considering Hideo Kojima made one of the most famous horror games of all time and gave it away for free. I think it's safe to assume that he wanted Ground Zeroes to be free, or at least included in MGS-V, but Konami had other plans. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Let's tread some old ground and talk about the self-destructive side of MGS4. If you've gotten this far, you're probably an MGS mega fan, and you know all about the self-destructive side of this game, so let's be brief in listing the facts before I get into my opinion on those facts. So, the old Snake thing, the accelerated aging. Snake not being able to use modern weapons, Snake ditching the cardboard box that reads "No place for Hideo," Snake getting a kink in his back when he does the more modern game maneuver of crouch walking, you touring an abandoned, decrepit Shadow Moses, this trailer that makes a point of saying that this is different from the other action games on the market. All of this really feels like it's there to say that MGS doesn't really fit in with the world of gaming anymore. People's desires have moved on. The mid to late 2000s were an era where a game with slow-paced gameplay and 8 hours of cutscenes was just weird and off-kilter. If it weren't for the powerful brand recognition, this game would be the absolute definition of financial risk. Snake is old now, and it's starting to feel like he can't keep up with the likes of these young, nanomachine-driven soldiers on their clean, sterile, emotionless battlefields. And this game makes a point of showcasing that. Then you've got the whole "this game ruined my childhood" angle. This is a good, really good plot. It's the most unique plot in the entire MGS series, and that's really saying something, but Very often it feels like the universe is practically breaking its own laws of physics to make scenes happen a second or third time. Naomi falls in love with Otacon for basically no reason other than to repeat EE and Sniper Wolf's death scenes. Raiden becomes a mindless killing machine a second time just so that he can reconnect with Rose at the end of the game again. Roy Campbell is faking a marriage with Raiden's ex-wife just so that he and Snake can have some drama before it turns out that Campbell really was a good guy all along, just like in MGS1. Crying Wolf chooses to have a sniper fight with Snake in this exact location, just so that it'll mirror Sniper Wolf's fight in MGS1. Screaming Mantis was basically injected with the soul of Psycho Mantis, just so that we could have that scene where he makes our controller vibrate with the power of his mind. I mean, Eva even comes back into the plot in an incredibly contrived way, for seemingly no other reason than to say a memorable line she said in MGS3, "I only get off my bike when I fall in love or fall dead." Only for her bike to crash and her to get wounded in the exact same way she did in Snake Eater. The list goes on and on and on and on and on, straight down to the final message of the game being, "You have to live, Snake," just like in MGS1. Here's the perceived problem with that, and with a lot of sequels in general. All of these characters already had their arcs, but now all of that personal progress just gets erased, all for the sake of them repeating their arc in the sequel for what seems like nothing but fan service. Raiden is the best example of this. MGS2 pretty heavily implies that he's done being a soldier. He's going to move on from his own dark past and is going to focus on his family with Rose and their expected child. That's a fantastic ending, but then MGS4 basically says, wait, never mind. Raiden kept on being a soldier, kept on obsessing over his past, but now he's going to get over that so that he can quit being a soldier and focus on his family with Rose and their child. It's just a straight-up do-over of his absolutely perfect character arc in MGS2. Then we've got everybody's favorite example of this game sort of sabotaging the lore. In MGS3, the Codec team were a bunch of wacky side characters. They joked about hiding in boxes, 007 spy gadgets, and Godzilla, and that was pretty much their main function in the plot of the story. They were more or less the comic relief. In MGS4, however, these people went on to create the Patriots with the help of Eva and Ocelot, who were on completely different sides during MGS3's events. Johnny and Merill get married in this game, seemingly for no other reason than the fact that Johnny said that Merill was hot in a random line in MGS1 that you might not have even encountered on your playthrough. There's a whole lot of these contrivances. For a lot of people, like myself on my first playthrough, these weird decisions were enough to distract me from the absolutely fantastic story of this game. Now that I've played again and really let myself see the genius of this game, I realize that in a game with 8 hours worth of cutscenes, all of this stuff really isn't that important and isn't all that detrimental to the story as a whole. If you're a lore freak, this stuff is hugely distracting, but if you're just playing this game, going on this journey for what it is, it's mostly just random bits of generally unimportant exposition in the middle of a long cutscene. Say what you will about Kojima's writing, it definitely has its quirks, and it is an acquired taste, but he's smart enough to know that Merill marrying Johnny is stupid as hell. But that doesn't mean that decisions like these were the point of the game. They're just quirks of it. However, if you're like me, that doesn't satisfy you one bit. So let me tell you why I think these quirks are in there in the first place. See, I know I've said MGS4 is really about yada 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 about a dozen times so far, but when I zoom out far enough and try to describe the whole thing in one quick sentence, I just land on MGS4 is about ending Metal Gear once and for all. Depending on how much you like the game and how much you think those retcons damage the previous games for you, MGS4 is either a meaningless bullet in the head to the series, or it's a glorious and meaningful final triumph that will put an end to the generations-long conflict that the rest of this series has been showcasing. I think we're all really familiar with that first angle. I myself did a video on that angle called MGS4 Let It Die. But that second angle is how I saw things this time around. I think it's what's meant by the whole bring zero back to nothing speech that Big Boss gives in the final scene of this game. We've destroyed all of the evil that allows for MGS plots to happen in the first place, and that evil always took the form of complicated, nuanced conspiracies that can have hour-long lore videos dedicated to them. MGS really did become a complete mess of lore. It's way too much to fully understand without having played the games a dozen times, and there are a lot of times when a full understanding is pretty much the only type of understanding that's sufficient to know what's going on in the series when you're playing. Liquid's arm being grafted onto Ocelot was a fairly small plot point in MGS2. If 7 years and 1.5 games later you forgot about that little detail, you're going to be so confused as to why Liquid is an antagonist in this game, since we all saw him die in the first one. When Big Boss kills Zero and dies himself, he's bringing Zero back to nothing. All remnants of the Patriots are gone. By destroying the Patriots, we've destroyed the conspiracy, and in destroying the conspiracy, we destroyed the need for all of this lore. By destroying the Patriots, we turned 1,000 into 0. Essentially, when Big Boss and Zero die, all of that complicated, messy lore is erased. When Big Boss dies, Zero turns back to nothing. It's a simple answer to a complicated problem, but at the time of writing, that's what all of these self-destructive retcons are to me. It's a game series destroying its own lore, going out of its way to make you hate that lore, because that lore is the times. That lore is the reason that Snake has continued to suffer game after game after game, and because by the end of this game, none of that lore is going to matter anymore. Then, if you're still following me, we get the first MGS post-credits dialogue that isn't a plot twist, but further affirmation of a happy ending. Otacon tells Snake that all of the intricacies of his story might not matter anymore, but that they still deserve to be passed on to the future. He says that he's going to stick with Snake even in these last few months of his life, so that he can be the progenitor of Snake's story, so that he can pass Snake's story on to us. To me, this is a downright beautiful way of ending it all, saying it might all be over and destroyed now, but we've still got years of history that we can enjoy, referring of course to the previous games in the Metal Gear series. Nothing that happens in these games, between messy lore dumps, retcons of happy endings, deconstructions of the series tropes, Metal Gear Survive releasing, or even Kojima's eventual death, will ever take away the games from you. You'll always have Metal Gear if you want it. Metal Gear Solid 4 is, in that way, a celebration of life at the time of death. Upon my most recent playthrough, Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots didn't feel like a bullet to the head for the series. It felt like a dignified death, and a celebration of all the fantastic experiences that the series has brought to its audience. Before I close out today's video and get to work on the MGSV video, finally ending this series, first off, I would like to show you this Metal Gear Mark II pin that I got my girlfriend after she finished the game. It's got Sunny and Otacon. It's so fucking cute. This even closes. Anyways, the real reason that I'm here is to give my thanks to the patrons, especially those who donate $10 or more monthly. This has been kind of a nightmare, this series to work on. Every single video gets less views than the previous one. I know it's a niche thing that's not going to be in everyone's interest, but it's something that I am extremely passionate about. And it's thanks to you patrons that I've been able to do this series at all. And it really has meant the world to me. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on my job now, and just a better work ethic in general. Over the course of this video's production, I switched to a full-on 8 hours a day, no bullshit, no jerking around and procrastinating schedule, and that's why this video came out so much more quickly than a lot of my others. But anyways, those patrons are The Narcissist Cookbook, Azyal Batoon, Spooky Ina, Guybrush, Mcoy, Voiced Mute, Cappy, Mina, Lake, Super, Freedom Rider, Eva Knight, Panda, Mr. Kokugo, Shay Theus, Bjorb, Lily Leons, Neris, Sean Hamilton, The Coombe Slayer, Monkey Monk's Monkey Monastery, Nomad Delilah Jester, Haunted Mystic, Charlotte, IW, Arda Aurelia, Poof Donut, Atheist, Femboy Fishing, Joannis, Laura M, Rio, Mia Maple, Vega Nelson, Demise, Nicole, Neurofilter, Ada Avery, Summer Celine Garnet Midnight, Big Time Jim, Darius Fazier, Dennis Vashakamer, Almost Dead Again, Gab, David Kaiser, Erica, and CeeLo. This one was a nightmare to produce. The 8-hour-long work days have helped a lot, but more so than any other game I've maybe ever covered, technical issues were a fucking nightmare on this video. I've got a PS3 right there with a copy of MGS4, works perfectly, but don't have a capture card, and I needed to use a no-HUD mod for a lot of this footage, so I had to play on an emulator, and at this point, I'm rambling. It was a whole thing. It sucked. It's done now. I can't imagine that the MGSV video will take too long to put together because it's a PC game. I can mod it. There's free cam mods. I can do whatever I want with it because it is at home on the PC. But have a good day, everybody.